In March 2021, a single ship ran aground in a canal in the Egyptian desert and halted $9 billion worth of trade per day. 6 days. 422 ships backed up like cars at a traffic light. The Ever Given, 400 meters long, owned by a Japanese firm, chartered by a Taiwanese company, crewed by 25 Indian sailors, had been pushed sideways across a 265-meter wide stretch of the canal by high winds and a dust storm. When the Suez Canal Authority finally pried it loose, their initial compensation claim was $916 million. The settlement came in at $540 million. That is the price tag for one accident. That was an accident. What has been happening since late 2023 is not an accident. It is war, low intensity, sustained, targeted, and the Suez Canal has not been the same since. The canal is a 193-kilometer trench cut through the Isthmus of Suez, connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. It has no locks, no complex engineering, no water staircase like Panama. The land is flat, the water is level, and that simplicity is precisely what made it worth building and worth fighting over. Ferdinand de Lesseps, a former French consul to Cairo, the concession in 1854 and broke ground in 1859. It took a decade and the lives of at least 100,000 Egyptian laborers, most conscripted peasants who received no wages, working with picks and shovels under conditions that brought cholera outbreaks and mass deaths. The canal opened in November 1869. Before it existed, ships sailing from London to Mumbai went around the southern tip of Africa, a journey of more than 22,000 kilometers. The canal cut that to under 12,000. It rewired the commercial geography of the world in a single decade. The British understood what that meant immediately. By 1875, the UK government bought a controlling share in the canal company. For the next 80 years, British and French interests ran the waterway. In 1956, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized it. Britain, France, and Israel invaded. The United States and Soviet Union forced them out. Egypt kept the canal. The crisis marked the end of European imperial reach in the Middle East. And it demonstrated, for anyone who needed convincing, that whoever controls this ditch controls something larger than geography. At its peak in 2023, the Suez Canal carried approximately 12 to 15% of all global trade, according to UNCTAD. That included 20% of the world's container cargo, around 9% of seaborne oil, and 8% of liquefied natural gas. Think about what that means in concrete terms. Carried 1 in every 5 container ships on Earth every year passes through this single strip of water. Over 20,000 ships transited annually. By 2015, Egypt had invested $9 billion expanding the canal, adding a parallel second lane 72 kilometers long, increasing daily capacity from 49 ships to 97. Canal revenues hit a historic high of $10.3 billion in 2023. Then the Houthis started shooting. Beginning in November 2023, Yemen's Houthi movement launched sustained missile and drone attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea, over 190 attacks by the end of 2024, targeting ships it claimed were linked to Israel in response to the war in Gaza. They sank 4 vessels and killed 9 sailors. The methods were industrial. Anti-ship ballisticals, cruise missiles, and suicide drones packed with explosives. Within weeks, the world's biggest shipping lines, Maersk, CMA CGM, MSC, redirected their fleets around the Cape of Good Hope. The number of ships passing through the canal fell from 2,068 in November 2023 to 877 by October 2024. Container transits collapsed by approximately 75%. Egypt's canal revenue plummeted from $10.3 billion to just under $4 billion. The Gaza ceasefire in October 2025 temporarily paused Houthi attacks. Maersk sent a vessel through the Red Sea for the first time in nearly 2 years. A carefully watched transit treated more like a test flight than a routine voyage. But as of mid-2026, Suez traffic remains roughly 60% below its 2023 baseline. By mid-January 2026, only 26 container ships per week were transiting, down from 80 before the crisis began. The Houthis retain the capability and have signaled renewed operations in response to U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran in early 2026. Shipping companies are not returning in force until the security picture is unambiguous, and it is not. Every extra day at sea around the Cape costs fuel time and insurance. The detour adds 10 to 14 days to Asia-Europe journeys. That cost lands somewhere in the price of a television, a pair of shoes, a car part. What a permanent closure would mean is instructive to calculate, and we now have a real-world experiment running to study. The Houthi disruption is the closest thing to a controlled test. Reduce Suez by 75% and see what happens. What happened is that freight rates for containers averaged 80% above pre-crisis levels for most of 2025. There is no quick alternative to the canal itself. Going around Africa adds roughly 7,000 kilometers to a voyage from the Persian Gulf to Rotterdam. For a fully laden container ship, that is an extra $200,000 in fuel per voyage, multiplied across thousands of annual transits. Your European manufacturers dependent on Asian components would need to hold 6 to 8 weeks of inventory rather than 2. Energy markets would reprice. LNG from Qatar reaching Europe via Suez would instead arrive via detour, adding weeks to already tightening supply chains. Carried, the IMF estimated in early 2024 that the Red Sea disruption alone could shave up to 0.7 percentage points off global GDP growth. Multiply that by duration and the numbers compound. The Suez Canal is not merely a shortcut. It is structural infrastructure, the reason certain supply chains were designed to be lean in the first place. When it fails, the lean supply chains don't bend. Carried, they break. A century and a half after the first ship sailed through, the ditch in the desert is still the margin between a world that works and one that doesn't.